Hello, everybody. Recently, I was asked by the Calcutta Women in Technology group to do a flow session. Khyati from that user group set up a series of sessions for their followers to learn flows. And they specifically asked me to do a screen flow session. And some of you may remember, I published a loan application use case flow session, a short video on my YouTube channel recently as well. So when I was preparing for this session, I said, let me just go behind the scenes and show you a simpler version of that same flow and how that is built using the flow builder. I was asked several times after publishing that short video, please show us how to do that flow, right? Well, it took me hours and hours to build that flow, and it uses an unofficial SF component that you have to install prior to building that solution. So I'm not going to go through that sophisticated solution here in this video, but you are going to see a simpler version that gives you the general idea on how to build something like this. And pretty much all the fundamentals, all the elements and the components and the tips and tricks about building a good screen flow is included in this video. So please enjoy and follow the video that we have recorded for the Calcutta Women in Technology group.
Hello and welcome everyone to Salesforce Women in Tech Group Kolkata. We are back with an exciting series on Salesforce Lightning Flows. A very quick introduction about me. My name is Khyati Mehta. I am a Salesforce marketing champion. I was recently featured on Salesforce blog for my outreach work. I'm professionally working as a Salesforce developer at Cognizant. I am the leader of this group and I'm also a community speaker, a trailhead mentor. I also run blog named as All About Salesforce, and I also have a podcast in India named Salesforce Orbits with Khyati. So we have certain contests running on. We will have a Kahoot quiz at the end of the session, which will be based on the session. Apart from that, you can also post and tweet your heart out over LinkedIn and Twitter about the workshop, and make sure that you tag the group, which is with Kolkata, and also tag Salesforce admins. Tag me, which is Khyatu07, and the speaker for the day, Egmin Utkan, and also use hashtags with Kolkata and with flows. And the winner will be chosen at the end of the day. So the agenda of the workshop is we do have a lot of material available for flows, but what makes this workshop stand out is this has been planned in a very detailed exercise manner so that it helps trailblazers understand everything from scratch. And we also have an amazing lineup of speakers who are experts in flows. Also, we have kept 2 days of only use cases and real life scenarios so that we'll have a detailed explanation of flows. So today's speaker is Andy Egnin Utkan. I'm sure everyone knows him. He's working as a senior Salesforce consultant at Cyrus Solutions. He is a Salesforce flow automation expert and is a creator of Salesforce Blade. Over to you, Andy.
Hello, everybody. Good evening to you. I guess it's early morning for me. Usually, I don't really do these sessions early in the day because I have to get caffeinated and everything. We'll see. We'll see how this one goes. Should be okay. Just a second before I share my screen, I need to open up something. Okay, so let me share my screen. So, Kati, if something goes wrong, we are running out of time, or there are questions, whatever, you can always speak over. I don't really check the chat window when I'm working through. So, you can talk to me. That's fine.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, so you see my screen, I believe, right?
Yes, we do see your screen.
Okay, so yesterday I was thinking what I should be doing for you folks. What I do is I do a lot of community events, and in general, I don't really like sales. I don't really like PowerPoint presentations. I don't do too many slides.
my material is tutorial style when I record it, and I do build flows live. It's kind of like a live low code session kind of thing, right? And I posted recently a video on YouTube about a use case, and that was the universal containers loan application use case. This is right now a page uh, that runs a flow on a community, and with the new term digital experience, right? So you open up this page here. You can do it yourself, by the way. Right now, it's not a very easy link, but um, it greets you with universal containers financing loan application, and then you can click next. And then it is going to ask you some basic information about yourself: first name, last name, phone, email, and the address fields. And you can click next and then enter your information about your occupation, employer, annual income. And then you can decide what type of application you are filling out. What type of loan do you want? Is it going to be a home equity or car, vehicle? And then you go to the terms screen, and on the terms screen, you have to agree with the terms. So you have to turn on the slider here, right here, to proceed. And what's cool about this one in particular is we have this path, or this component over here, that allows us to go in sequentially from one section to another, right? So we don't really have to go next. If we fill out something here, it's going to show that value again when I go back in my application. Then I have the ability to submit in the end, and that's going to save a record. In this case, an application record in the Salesforce instance. So we're going to build something similar to this. I mean, it took me hours to build this one, so we're not going to be able to build this in full, but we'll show you how these things are done. Because in general, as you know, there are many different types of flows, and uh, one of the most popular flows is screen flows. And whenever we have to display a message, a static text, a string, or variable field values, variable information, formula values on the screen, whenever we have a screen dialog with the user, we have to use the screen flow. So we are going to be doing screen flows today. So I took this example because when I posted this on the YouTube channel, the YouTube channel only gave a brief description of the solution. It didn't show how to do it. And I had obviously a few people asking me, show me how to do that. So let's go into that a little bit. So to make this available inside the org, I actually changed the flow around a little bit, and I added it to my Lightning page for the contact record. So you can see here on the right side, I have the same flow, similar, running on the right side without the path component, without the ability uh, going from one screen to another in sequentially. This is going to go in sequence from one record to another. And it is going to create, again, an application record that is going to be associated with the contact that we have already in the org. So it's the same idea. We have to choose what type of loan we want and then accept the terms. And in this case, obviously, we are not going to have the external user accessing our Salesforce org, but imagine this is a call center agent or a face-to-face customer service or sales professional reading these terms, or possibly even printing out and showing these to the client for the client to agree. And then this will save, again, an application record on the org. And I think I've done one here. I can show you right here. So application 45. I haven't filled out all the fields here, but you can get the idea. First name, last name, all the fields are filled up here, and you can see the contact lookup here on the bottom. It's associated with Jack Rogers. Let's go into our flows. So small pro tip here, like if you're working with a lot of flows, and if you're working in a team with your friends building on the same flows, we don't really have the folder functionality inside flows yet, but we have the ability to customize our list views. This is a list view like any other list view in your Salesforce org. So you can clone and customize your list view, and you can set filters with the contains criteria here. So in this case, I said, if the label contains loan, then go ahead and show me those flows. That's how I filter through my flows. So this one is the one in particular that I have customized for yesterday. When you are in auto layout form, it looks quite simple. There's just one decision down here, checking whether the privacy policy has been accepted. And other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So this is what we're going to build. I don't know how far we're going to get, but we can always try. And just a small warning, when we build flows, things get messy and we experience error messages and this and that. Just know that. And this is how it's going to be for you as well. If you're starting new, this is an area where you want to experiment and learn. Doing a lot of trials and errors.
And is it possible to zoom in a little?
Yeah, sure. Oh, I'm sorry. It's I thought this one was at 125 too. It's not. Thanks for the warning, Khyati. Okay, so when we click on new flow, we get presented this screen where there's a lot of choices. And for the new beginners, this is already scary. They're like, oh, I don't know what to do, so I'm going to stop. So let me just give you a very brief overview, because this is the first session in a series of sessions. And I'm really proud and humbled to open the stage for all these great content creators, because there are so many great content creators here working on Flow, which is great for everybody. Now, we have screen flow type, record triggered, schedule triggered, platform event, and auto launch flow. So in summary, whenever we've been through this, whenever we have a message, a screen element we want to present to the end user, we have to use a screen flow. None of the other flow types will have any screen interaction with your users. Record triggered flow is the flow type that corresponds one-to-one pretty much to your workflow rules and process builders. They do actually more than what they do, but this is the idea. Whenever a record is created, updated, or deleted, we can trigger one of these guys. And schedule triggered flow we use whenever we want to trigger a flow on a predetermined schedule, meaning we want to start a flow on the 30th of November at 8 p.m. local time. Then we will use this flow type. And we can also set these on a recurring schedule. Now, these are often confused with the scheduled path delayed actions. Scheduled path delayed actions happen in record triggered flows. That's an option that you can use here to say, I want to create a task 7 days after the record is updated. Platform event triggered flows are triggered based on platform events being created. This is not really widely used. It's a particular use case, but it does solve a lot of problems for people if they choose to use these. And auto launch flows are invoked by Apex, processes, REST API, and more. So these run in the background and they are launched on demand. So they'll be launching whenever we want them to launch. We will have to trigger them on purpose. And record triggered flows in the background, many of these in the background are auto launch flows. So don't get surprised if you see these in your list view or in some interfaces as auto launch flows. So these are often listed as auto launch flows triggered on a record update on the object of opportunity, let's say. So we are going to go into our screen flow. We get presented two options: auto layout, freeform. Auto layout is still in beta, but we can get started with this. It keeps everything in order. And if we feel like that's limiting, we can always change back to the freeform. So this is our canvas, and this is our manager on the left side. So we're going to get started building this. If you've been working on flows in the past as well, what happens is whenever you want to position your flow running on an existing record inside Salesforce, you want your flow to use that record ID. That's how you associate your record with your flow. The Salesforce needs to know which record to run this flow on. So to get started with that, we are going to create a new resource on the left side. Whenever we want to create a new resource for a record ID, that's going to be of type text variable, and then here text. We want to name this one record ID. This is an old naming convention that is required in some deployment methods. We still use this one. It is not required so much anymore. You know, like in Lightning apps, when we're positioning this the way I've just shown you, we don't really need to name it record ID like this, but you know, it's a good practice to do so. And we are going to mark this available for input. What this means is this flow is going to have this record ID value passed to it. And for those of you who don't know what a variable is just a container that holds information for me temporarily to use inside my flow. And once my flow is done, this is going to disappear. It's not going to be written to the database and kept there, but I need this container for me to pass the record ID to the flow so that the flow knows what record the flow is going to run on. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an initial screen. When you are working on screen flows, you want to create obviously a screen for your UI interaction. You get a header and a footer. Excuse me. Header is not very useful generally because it is going to assume and show the flow ID, flow label. So I usually end up hiding the header. And the footer is where the next finish button are usually that you have to have them on. You want to name your screen something. I'm going to call this one intro screen. Your API name is auto-generated. And then to display a title, I usually use a display text component here. And I'm going to name this one intro title and say, I'm going to call this one start application. And this is a rich text area, so I can make this one bold. And I'm going to proceed to adding fields now on my screen. Now, before I do that, you want to save your flow early on and name it. Let's call this one loan application session light and flow. API name is generated. I don't have to change any of the parameters, and I'm going to save this. So this one is saved, and there are several ways we can work with variables and screen elements in the way we capture the information. In this case, what I want to do is, because I don't want to lose any of the information that I capture, a lot of times what we want to do is we want to save that information from one screen to another on a record on the database so that we don't lose this information. So what I'm going to choose to do in this case is I'm going to create an application record early, and I'm going to work on that application record and update fields as I go along. So the way I would do that is I would create an application record. And we have decided our approach is going to be, we are going to create one application record, and we are going to we are going to use separate resources and literal values to decide what the values are going to be. And it's going to be of object application. We need to tell Salesforce what type of object we are creating. And we have decided already that this application is going to be associated with the contact that we are launching this flow on. And that contact record ID is going to be kept for us in the variable record ID. So I'm going to pass that to contact. So let's save this one. So we have created an application. And once we have created the application, we can get this application. And use I'm going to use the application ID from create application and use this application now to update all my field values. I'm going to use these on the screen, and I'm going to pass all the values that I'm collect from the user and update this record variable with it. Because once I do my get records here, this get records is going to get that one record and automatically store all fields, which means it's going to give me a record variable that I can work with. And a record variable is a container, again, that holds all the field values for the record I'm working with. So this is a container that's going to hold temporarily all the field values for that one particular application I've created. So far, it has only the contact ID and its own ID. All the rest of the fields are not filled in yet. So once I've done all these steps, now I can go back to my intro screen. And yeah, well, let me just add something static here, and I will explain why I'm doing this in a moment. So let me say, please proceed with the button next to start the application. And I'm going to create another screen here to start collecting the information. I'm going to turn off the header, name this one contact details, and then again drop in a display text component here, details title, and I'm going to start collecting the information here, and I'm going to show you and demonstrate that I can use now a section component here, which was not available to me a couple of releases back. What this allows me to do is to use a multi-column format in my flows. So now I can actually create 2 columns, and I can do up to 4 columns here. I'm going to use 2 columns. And let me see if I can use the fields beta functionality. That's not 100% GA yet, but it could give me some ideas. So I can have my fields beta point to my record variable, and I can use the fields that are supported already, and I can drop them onto my screen. And it comes with all the different configuration parameters that are associated with that field already. So it is really fast for the field types that it's available. When you're putting together a demo or something for somebody, for a client customer, this is actually quite useful. So you can drop in the first name, and then you'll see that it comes with all the length validations and whether it's required or not. It does all that for me. I can drop in the last name. These are all available. Now, because this is already associated with a contact, I decided not to use these in this example. Instead, I'm going to start with the birth date here. So birth date, I'm going to ask, and what else do we have? Street, zip, submitted date. And let's ask for occupation here too, because we are in the 2-column format. Let's make this one work for us. And then right below, I can continue with my address fields. Street is also supported. Let me just drop that in. And I'm going to go back to my regular components here and continue with the address. What else is in the address that we need to include here? So we are going to drop in a text input for city. So this is for city. And we're going to do a pick list for state. The pick list is not supported yet on the fields beta, so we're going to have to do it here. And the way you do pick lists is you would drop in that component and then decide whether it's required or not, and whether it's going to be multi-select pick list. You can select here multi-select. Once you do a multi-select pick list, you have actually two options. You can either do the pick list UI choice, or you can actually do a checkbox group. That's also another alternative if you're using multi-select pick lists. In this case, this is actually a pick list. And you can also use a radio button, either pick list or radio button. You can change back and forth quite easy now here. A couple of releases back, that was not possible. And you have to also decide what choices are available, and you can create resources for choices, whether they are a single static choice that you can create, or they can be pick list or record choice resources. So we are going to create a choice resource here. That's going to be not a static single one, not a record choice set. It's going to be a pick list choice set. And I'm going to call this one state pick list choice set. And I'm going to go to the application and get that one from the state pick list. So what the system can do for me is go to the object that I'm pointing to, go to the field under that object that I'm again pointing to, and if that field is a pick list field, and I'm only presented with pick list fields in this dialog here in my picker, it's going to pick up all the available choices and present those on the screen. And I can change the order if I wanted to, which in this case I don't want to. And I can also assign a default value. So we have done that. We've done street, city, state. And what else do we have remaining? Zip, right? So let me just drop that in. And call this one zip, and that should be it. So I think those are the fields that we needed: birthday, occupation, street, city, state, and zip. That's good for now. Let's say done. Let's go ahead and save another version. So we have collected all that information. Now, when you collect this information on the screen, don't think like these right here, like for example, the zip or the state that the user fills out on the screen are going to get automatically updated on the database. So we have to do some work for that. So in this case, because we have decided to work with a record variable, we are going to use an assignment here to assign the field values. Let's call this one assign details. And I need to take the zip under my record variable. And the way I can find this, I can start typing get. I see that here actually, but I usually start typing the name of the get element that I have used. And then I'll see the record variable here. I need to drill down once to go down to it, and then pick the zip from the list. Let's see what we call that. Yeah, we call it zip postal. So scroll down, point on this one. So this one is going to say, you know what, take the field under the application, and that's going to equal to the screen element called zip. And if you're doing this right, screen component, if you're doing this right, you are going to see that this is of type text here with this logo here, and it's listed under screen components. So it's going to assign that. Let's do this one for city. So city is going to equal the city, the screen component. And state pick lists are important. They are not going to get auto assigned. State is going to equal to the state pick list screen component. Now, the one cool thing about the fields beta is the ones that we have actually added from fields beta: birth, date, occupation, and I think we've added also the street we can see here. We don't really have to assign. Salesforce takes care of that for us. So we just got to assign city, state, and zip, which we have done. And let's continue with the next screen. But before we continue, Khyati, are you there? Do we have any questions? I can actually answer a couple of questions as we go along if we have any.
Yes, we do have a question. Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
What interface I need to use to make Aura component invocable and screen flow?
Oh, wow, very advanced question. Let's hold off on that one until later.
Sure.
Any other questions?
We do have one more. Just a second. How to hide header and footer? Like, can we hide buttons and footer, like keeping only one button?
Yes. Let me just show you right away. Okay, so if you go here, click on your footer, you can decide to hide your footer. But if you are going to try and hide your footer, like let's say on the second screen in a sequence of 3 screens, you're going to get an error message because there's not going to be a way for the user to proceed, right? So you cannot hide it in that case entirely. But then you can also decide what happens with the other buttons. So you can hide pause, you can hide previous, you can hide some of these, and you can now relabel them all. This is in beta functionality, but we didn't have this one before. You can just rename next, show me the money. You can rename next, let's go. You know what, you can do whatever you want with it. Any other questions?
What if I use the update record element instead of the assignment element?
You can use the update element and then assign the field values one by one at the end. I just chose to use a record variable so that I can actually use fields beta. If you decide to use the update element at the very end and then assign all the field values one by one yourself, then you don't get to use this right here, because the fields beta needs to point to a record variable, which means you don't have a record variable to point to. That's why I've done it that way.
Okay, there's one more question. Instead of assigning the variable to fields, cannot we add directly fields in section and create the record?
Yeah, we can actually, if we decide to create the record at the very end here, we can also again assign all the field values one by one. We can do that. But the challenge here is when you're going through multi-screen flows, is when the user doesn't get to finish what they've started, right? You need to save those values somewhere. And then, sometimes it is easier for you to create the record up front and then to do several updates in between so that you don't lose that information. We are going to get to that discussion later. So let's continue now then, Khyati, and then we'll take some more questions later.
Sure.
Okay, so we've done the intro screen, we've done the contact details, we've done our assignment. So we are, again, this assignment is temporarily holding that information for me in the record variable. I haven't updated anything to the database yet. So for you programmers, there is no DML that's happening here yet, right? So now I'm going to add another one here. And that's going to be for the next, what we called before, the loan details screen, let's say. In comments, whatnot. So let's add another screen here, hide the header, drop in another display text. And I'm going to call this one, let's say, income details, because we did ask that information on the screen. Income details title. And I shall remember to name also my screen income, or I'm going to get an error message. That one is done as well. So now let's continue and fill out the rest of the information, which is what did we have here? I think the most important thing is the currency, the income information. So let's not forget that. Annual income. We want that to be filled out. And again, another important one is the loan type that's been requested. So I'm going to drop in a radio button here, and I'm going to call this one loan type. And let's require this one. And for the choices here, I'm going to do something similar. And I'm going to go to my create choice resource dialog and say loan type list choice. I need to choose pick this choice set here, loan type pick list choice. And I'm going to point to the application object again. And under that, I want to point to type. I think, is this the application I want to be using? Because there are a couple of applications on this network that I'm using, I think. This is the one I want to use. Yes, now I got it right. So done. This is also done. We don't really have a default value. We can point to one here. And I'm presented with the available options here if I wanted to choose one. And let's keep it at that. I mean, I don't think this would be brief information that would be probably sufficient to get at least an application, preliminary application started to, show interest on the customer side that they are interested in a loan. And let's do our assignments for this one. So what I can do here is I can actually copy and paste elements. Copy this element and paste this copied element here, if that makes sense for you. In this case, it's not that helpful, actually. Just wanted to show you that you can do that. Assign income, and let's do get application income. It's going to be the annual income field on the screen, and the get application loan type equals the loan type radio. And let's do the final screen. Hide header and display text. And this is going to be terms screen, terms text. You can use colors here. This is rich text. You can use whatever you want. And you can also drop in field values, formula values, variables in here. Those will compile and display. And I'm going to say and blah, blah, blah. All right, so these are the terms that need to be accepted. And then I'm going to, just for a change, I'm going to drop in a toggle element. And I'm going to call this one accept terms toggle. And this is going to show that the user is accepting. And here, I need to check whether the user accepted the terms. I'm going to call this one terms accepted. First outcome is yes, terms accepted. And I'm going to check the toggle value. If the toggle value equals true, then terms have been accepted. If not, no, terms not accepted. I like to name these human readable longish labels, so that, it's easier to read on the screen. So if the terms have been accepted, then we can go ahead and we can go ahead and update our application and save it as terms have been accepted. So in this case, I'm going to do an assignment. Call this one assign terms. And what do we call that one? I wonder. Get application. And oh, okay. So this is the annual income. So we have actually here something called privacy policy accepted. That's what we're going to use, equals true. So if we are down this path, that equals true. We can point it directly to true, or we can use the value from the toggle, whichever. So if we are down this path, we should have this true. And then what I'm going to also use here and assign is the which one is the submitted date field. So if that's true, I want to assign to the submitted date the global variable under flow that's available to me is the current date and time. I'm going to assign to that. And here is the area where I want to actually update all the changes to my database. That's my DML operation. So I will go to my update element and then say update application. And in this case, I can use the get application record variable and update all the changes to the database in one shot. So that's the difference in approach in doing this versus assigning all the field values here. So save this one. I'm going to briefly turn off auto layout here to look at my flow. So when the terms that have been accepted, I'm going down this path, which is good. If the terms have not been accepted, I can actually, let me just do this. I don't want to leave this half-hearted. So when I turn off my auto layout, I immediately get also the elements tab here. In this working method, I have to drag my elements from the left side and drop it here. So I'm going to do another one, not accepted screen. Another one here, hide the header. So when you have different conditions that you want to let the user know about, and you want to do error messages that are handled gracefully and shown to the user, you want to do a screen that just shows that information. So I'm going to call this one terms not accepted message. And I'm going to say the terms have not been accepted. You need this step to proceed. All right, so let's bold this one and italic this one, whatever you want to do. So let's display this message if that's the case, and kick them back to the term screen again. Right, so this is how we're going to do this. So now we need to debug. If you've been dealing with workflow rules and process builders, I call that type of automation building automation blindfolded because they don't have debug. So we have debug here. Use it to the max. It's very helpful for you. So now I'm going to go back to my Salesforce org instance and go to my contact, who was Jack Rogers, and grab the user ID from the browser bar. Oops. And use it in my debug. So as soon as I hit my debug, because I have identified and created a record ID text variable and marked it as input, it's going to ask me what that variable value should be. And I'm going to paste this here and run it. So it's going to show me the static screen and message that I have created. On the right panel, I'm going to see, let me make this a little bit bigger. On the right panel, I'm going to see all the steps that the flow took to get here. So I can see that my record ID variable has been set to this value that I've pasted. And my get application, my create application has been completed successfully. And the ID of that record is this, the application record. And then I get that application record here. And then it found that record successfully. As soon as I hit next, I'm going to go to the next screen where all this information will be asked of me. Let's fill out some stuff here. My state packlist only shows Florida for some reason. I guess I have not filled in maybe all the available states in my field values. I will check that. So hit next. Annual income 200,000. Loan type HELOC, home equity. And then we are going to accept the terms. And it says the transaction has been committed. We did not see any error messages, so the record must have been created. Now, when you are doing debug here, just the reminder, for some flow types, you are going to be presented a rollback option, right? You can tell the debug that the debug should not commit any changes to the database. You don't want those changes to be committed to the database. But in this type of flow, we don't get presented that option, which means the record has been created. So let's go here, check under Jack Rogers whether that's true. So we have a couple of applications here. I think we had 2, we have 3 now. This is the latest one here. And local time in Jacksonville right now is 8:23 a.m. And you can see I have the right time zone set up here. So this one was created on 8:22, modified at 8:22 a.m. It was in fact created at 8:20, which makes sense because I first create my application and then I go to update it. You'll see all these field values have been updated on the database. So Khyati, any questions so far?
Do have certain questions. Is there any possibilities to use a screen flow in the backend of Salesforce without UI?
Yeah, well, screen flows do not have to have screen elements, which means it won't display anything. Now, for certain deployment areas and methods, you have to have an active screen flow to use. Like, for example, if you wanted to run a flow on your Lightning app record page, I showed you how I deployed mine early on. You have to have an active screen flow to use that. Or you want to deploy it like on a button on your record page again, and that button, behind that button, you have to have a active screen flow. But your active screen flow does not have to have any screen element. If it doesn't have any screen element, it's just going to run kind of in the background. But I mean, if you are not deploying your flow for like, using any of these methods, I don't know whether it would make sense for you to create a screen flow that you would run in the background. You can use, the other flow types for that.
There's one more question. In screen flow, if we want to display two messages simultaneously, then is it possible to display that? It says that, I mean, in one flow, in that case, do we need to create two screens, or in one screen it can do that?
So you want to display two messages on one screen? Is that the question?
The question is, can we display two messages simultaneously? Do we need to create two screens for that, or one screen is enough?
Okay. Well, if I understand the question correctly, so this is what you can do here. Where should we do this? Let's do it here. So here I have a display text, right? So, and I can create here another display text element and say, okay, toggle value. And I can say the toggle value at the toggle value is false, right? So I'm displaying actually two messages, and I can use conditional visibility as well if I want to display two messages. And I can also display variable information here. For example, let's say I want to present the current date and time. I can use the flow current date and time global variable. So if I insert that here, that's going to show. Let me just make this one italic, right? And now I can also use conditional visibility here because I said my toggle is false. That's not going to hold true. Well, actually, it is going to hold true always, right? Because if they have not accepted the terms, they are going to land here. Yeah. But there could have been a situation where you wanted to display that on one of the input screens and you wanted to make it conditional. So you could actually say here, if my screen toggle value equals false, I only want to present and show this section here. So essentially, you're displaying two messages on one screen, and you have the functionality to show things conditionally as well. Any other questions?
I have few. Maybe we can take it at the end of the session.
Okay. All right. So, well, let's deploy this one, right? So, I mean, you want to also see, if you've never done this before, how to put this on your Lightning app page, record page. So you have to activate it before you do that, first of all, right? Activate it here. And then you got to remember the label, loan application session light flow, right? So you would go to your contact, go to Jack Rogers, and edit page. And when you edit page, you are going to see on your left panel a bunch of components that you can use. Now I have this one deployed already here. Let me delete this one so that I can show you from scratch. Now I can go to the left and then drop this flow component in here. I can put it here. I can put it here. I can put it on a different tab. I can create a new tab and drop that in there. So once I drop that in here, for some silly reason, Salesforce UI picks the first one and then displays that active screen flow here, which I want to change if I have multiple. So I would pick the loan application session light flow. If your flow doesn't show up here, you have not activated it. And you can use multi-column. And here is the area where I can pass the record ID to my flow. So it doesn't really matter in this case what I named my variable inside the flow. So that name is going to show up here. If I name that one contact ID or applicant ID, that is going to show right here, the way I named it inside my flow. And you used to have to remember a certain syntax to be able to pass that value from your Lightning app page to your variable. Now you don't have to remember. You can just click on this here, and then it fills in for you because the syntax is this, and it's automatically filled. So you can save this one. If you're not activated, you need to activate it. And then when you go back, it is going to show. Now, the interesting thing about this one is if you deploy your flow here on your Lightning record page, it is going to auto run every time this page gets pulled up. So if you're working in an org where you have 5,000 call center agents, and then they are pulling 200 records each every day, you want to be very careful with what you run here. That's the reason why I inserted here a static screen first, because my flow is going to auto run, and all it's going to do is show the start application screen. I think I'm doing my create and get before this, which is the wrong approach, by the way. We need to change that. So my start application screen should only do, and let me just go ahead and do that right here. And this is how you go back and forth in your design if you did something wrong or suboptimally. Here, what I want to do is, let me just deactivate this one. Take this start screen that displays the static information and then position that up front. I don't want to be creating a record every time somebody pulls up the Lightning app page, right? That would be the wrong thing to do. So here, connected this way, that's the right approach. So I need to now save this as a new version and activate it. I don't really have to do any other work on this side. That should always take the active latest version. And now it's doing what I designed for it to do, which is just show this screen and not do anything else. And when I hit next, I'm going to create the application record and ask all this information. And when I hit next here, and then I'm going to choose the loan type, annual income, and next, let's not activate here to test that route as well. When you are testing your flows, you want to make sure you are testing all the different decision outcomes. That you have to go down all the paths. And here you can see that the message, the terms have not been accepted. You need this step to proceed. And then this is the second message we have added to test things out. The toggle value is false. And this is the current date and time. If I hit next, it's going to kick me back to the same screen where I have to accept the terms. Obviously, there is some more work that needs to be done so that we don't end up in this infinite loop here. But so that's how far we've gone for now. Any other questions so far?
Yes, we do have a couple of them. How we invoke Visual Force pages by using Flow.
Okay, next. We're keeping all these Aura Visual Force for later.
Okay. So is there a limitation on running flows count in a day?
Okay, so first of all, with the limitations, governor limits related to flows, it's an important topic. Let me just briefly touch on this. It's a long topic, so we're not going to do all of it. Now, all your governor limits have to be respected when you're working with flows. If you are doing a get step and you're getting like 55,000 records in your get step, you're going to go over your governance limits, and you're going to get an error message. And then you have a 2,000 elements maximum that you can run in one flow interview. So you cannot loop through a lot of stuff and then end up evaluating and executing like 2,500 elements. That's going to fail. But in general, I don't think you have a limitation on how many flows you can run in a day. And you have just your execution limitations on what you can execute on, what you can run in terms of DML, in terms of your get element, SOCkwell, and you want to be watching those. And I think there is a limitation on the scheduled paths that you can have. You cannot have more than a number of scheduled paths outstanding. So if you have delayed actions, so it really depends on your use case, but there are limitations that you wanna watch for and respect. Any other questions?
When using a screen flow to collect information like this on an Experience Cloud site, are there any specific guest users sharing security system permission or site builder concerns one should keep in mind from out of the box
Yes.
starting point?
Very good question. That's how we started this. All right. Our use case and the way we deployed was in a community, and it was on the guest user. Now, in general, if you're dealing with loan applications and whatnot, you don't really want to use the guest user to do this, right? It is not that really problematic to collect that information and then save it somewhere for that information to be used later, like an application form like this. But in general, when you're working with guest user, you don't know who the user is, who is entering the information. So first of all, you open up your site for all kinds of spam, bots, spam, unidentified users. You don't really want to do that. Second of all, if you are working with records inside Salesforce, like for example, let's say we wanted to associate this application with a contact that exists inside Salesforce, that means we have to share all those contact records using sharing rules with the guest user. And when I say guest user, it means anybody outside who is not identified. And that is very, very risky. So you don't really want to do that. So the limitations on working with guest user is actually information security and sharing and visibility considerations. That's a very important topic. You want to be very careful with that. I have 2 videos on my YouTube channel, Salesforce Break. Look them up on how to use the guest user and the sharing rules and everything to be able to deploy your flows on a Visualforce page and on a community page. I show you how to do that one by one, but just beware of those risks. So before we finish up, because we are going to run out of time, I want to show you also a couple of other things very, very fast, right? Here, first of all, the way, you remember I showed you at the beginning, my flow was actually remembering all the values that I have filled out. If I went back and forth from one screen to another, it was actually remembering. How do you do that, right? So if you go to your screen here, what you want to be doing is the city here doesn't have a default value. If you assign the city under your record variable that you're using from your get step here, it is going to use whatever value is in there already. So if you go back and forth, it is going to assume the value that you have entered before and show you that value back, which you can edit again. Another thing that you want to also know and use whenever necessary. Now, unless you use the fields beta functionality, in this case, we didn't use here the fields beta functionality, your flow doesn't have any idea what your field validations and field limitations are on the record side, on the object side. So if you have defined your field of annual income on your object as just a 6-digit field, but you allow the user to enter 9 digits here, you are going to have an error message when you go to create that record, right? So you want to use your validations here. So whenever you have a validation need on the record side, you want to recreate, you want to do that validation here as well. And this is how you do it. You'll say your income, I'm going to do a low limit here, cannot be less than 4 digits, let's say, right? Now, the weird thing about the validations inside Flow is this is actually the exact reverse logic that you have inside Salesforce. So you know how inside Salesforce you define your logic, and if that logic is true, you display the error message. Here you actually define what the user needs to be doing. So you define what's acceptable. So here in this case, I need to point to the field here of annual income. And I need to say my annual income needs to be greater than, what did I say? It needs to be greater, equal, I said 4 digits, right? 4 digits. I think this will do it, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I think that's correct. So if the user does not enter something that fits the validation rule, they are going to see this message here. This message here displayed, and I can make this red, bold, whatever, right below the field. I don't get to choose whether that is displayed somewhere else. It's going to show just below the field. And that concludes my presentation for today. And let's do the rest of the questions, Khyati, and then I'll also try and give some insight on the previous questions I deferred, Aura and Visualforce.
Sure. So the first question would be, how many flows we can use as per one object for best practice?
Okay, so this is well, I mean, the jury is still out on that one. That's how I would define it. Now, it depends on what kind of position you take on these types of matters, first of all. Like, generally, I'm not very much for defining very rigid rules about things, right? If something works and it's tested really well, it works. So there's no reason for me to say it's not allowed, you shouldn't do this, you should never do this, because it really depends on your use case, how difficult and sophisticated your configuration is on your org, how many users do you have, and how many records you process every day, and that kind of stuff, right? So in general, I've seen posts lately by Apex Hours and some other folks saying, well, you should only do one record triggered flow on one object of each type, meaning you should have one before save flow and one after save flow on opportunity, and that should be it. Well, there are a couple of problems with that approach, potential problems, so which is why I don't really say that. Now, if you try to do that, first of all, we have only subflows available for after save flows at this point. So if you try to combine everything under one flow, and if you want to be able to use your subflows, because this flow is going to possibly get quite big, then you are going to pile up all your logic and elements in one after save flow with a bunch of decision steps. Now, from a maintenance perspective, you might like that. You might want everything in one place. The problem with that approach is That flow is going to run every time that record is updated or created, most probably. It is not possible for you to narrow down with your entry criteria when this flow runs. I prefer to create multiple flows with very, very rigid and nailed down and narrow entry criteria so that, and, and preferably mutually exclusive entry criteria so that you almost never have multiple flows running in one particular use case. So let's say you say your opportunity is in negotiation stage, run this before safe flow. If your opportunity is in decision stage, then run this maybe after safe flow. If you can define your entry criteria and then make them hopefully mutually exclusive, there is no reason why you shouldn't have multiple record triggered flows. That's my take on it.
You. So what if the user does not have a run flow permission? Will the flow still display in the record page?
Well, if the user doesn't have, well, there are two permissions that the user will need. On the user, you have the run flow checkbox. And then you have also on the permission, there is a system setting that needs to be turned on that shows whether the user can run a flow or not. So you need to have those two. If you don't have, for example, the flow user checked on the user, you don't even see the buttons. If you deploy this flow as a button, for example, you don't even see the button that is tied to a flow on the on the screen for that user. But if the user can see the flow, if the user is able to deploy the flow, start the flow, trigger the flow, then what you can do is you can use here, and I'm going to show you right here, your and the user's current permissions does not allow for the user to make some of the changes, then you can actually use this in some flow types. Use this pull down here to say, I want to run my flow at system context without sharing. So this is pretty much God mode right here. And if you are a programmer, you know what I mean here as well. Then you can actually pretty much make all the changes triggered by the user without being limited by the sharing rules that the user has and at the system context.
The next question is, can we pass multiple values to flow like we passed record ID?
Yes, you definitely can. What you will have to do is you can define, like, let's say, I never tried, but probably 10 different variables. As long as you uh, mark all those variables available for input, you are going to be able to pass those values into your flow. And by the way, there is also another checkbox there. If you've paid attention, that you can also mark those available for output, which means if you're, for example, doing subflows or you're passing values to your screen flow and then you want to get those values back, you can also get those values back as well.
Okay. The next question is in flows, can we can integrate with other applications? Like that's
Uh,
question. Can we integrate with other application and flows?
Other applications. Is that the question? Can we integrate with other applications?
Yes.
Okay, so, well, the big one is I don't think we can run a flow inside a Lightning web component right now, currently. And I know because once in a while, the Flow product team will meet with me and then get my opinion on a couple of things. They are gracious to get my feedback on stuff. I know that they are working on this one. This is going to be a big one. So if you can deploy your flow on a Lightning web component, that's going to open up a lot of things, right? So that's how you can integrate other than the methods I showed you, which is not available yet. Uh, I cannot think of any other examples. Let's go back to the visual force and aura question. I think you can deploy, I think the question was whether you can deploy an aura from within the flow. I think that was the question. I think I
It's
think
like
you can.
can we invoke and visual force pages by using flow?
Okay, let's start with Visual Force. You can invoke, I mean, Visual Force page is pretty much uh, a URL, right? So it's a hosted page that has logic in the background. So you can actually, there are several ways and methods you can invoke a page using the URL from within the flow. Uh, and there are unofficial SF components, there are app exchange components that you can use, there are sample codes that allow you to send your flow to a URL in certain conditions. You can either insert a button or you can just decide to send your flow to that page right after the last screen. That's possible. About Aura, I just looked into this one because of a use case for a client. If you have an Aura component and if you put a couple of lines of codes into your Aura component, I think that becomes invocable inside your flow. So that should be possible too. I haven't tried.
So we'll take the last question for the day. It's in record trigger flow. Is it possible to handle try and catch? Does this prompt user with exact error message on top of the record?
In record triggered flow, how can you handle your faults? I guess that would be the question, right? So first of all, well, that reminded me something which I was almost gonna forget. I'm not gonna show you now, but Salesforce product team gave us something huge. Now, if you go into your screen flows, there is a rollback component, rollback element, which means you know how I chose to create my application right at the very beginning. Now, what the problem with that approach used to be, if you had the user experience some issues, whatever, they didn't complete the whole interview, you would get like a lot of half-baked records in your org that you don't want. Now, if you insert a rollback element inside your screen flow, now based on certain business logic, and you can even tie those to your fault lines, you can roll back all the record changes that you have in your flow. So that created record is going to roll back and it's going to disappear, which is fantastic. Now, let's go back to record triggered flows. For record triggered flows, you don't have the option of displaying messages to the user. So I think a good component of graceful error handling is that you catch all these conditions and then you display your user a message and a couple of options on how to proceed. So you don't have that. You have fault lines. You can use fault lines to tie that to a certain condition. But again, you cannot display anything to your user that's under your control. So that's to the extent I can comment on that question.
Thank you so much, Andy, for clearing all the doubts. Thank you for taking such an insightful session. It was really wonderful.